Ukraine and Russia have held their first peace talks in more than 2 weeks. Both sides are expected to make statements this hour. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, host of the meeting in Istanbul, told delegates from Kyiv and Moscow that it's up to them to stop the tragedy in Ukraine. And he stressed peace will not yield any losers. Live to Latvia and Lviv in just a moment, but first a look at frosty tensions as the highly anticipated meeting began.
A cold start to the talks as Ukrainian and Russian delegations gather in Istanbul. The two sides did not shake hands before they got down to business. This is the first face-to-face negotiations between the two countries in more than 2 weeks. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says it's time for concrete results as the prolonged conflict benefits no one. He added that progress will be key to arranging high-level talks between Presidents Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin.
Sizlerin müzakerelerde sağlayacağınız ilerleme, bir sonraki aşama olan liderler düzeyindeki teması da mümkün hale getirecektir. Böyle bir görüşmeye de ev sahipliği yapmaya hazırız. Sizlerin burada bir araya gelmesi bile dünyada ve ülkelerinizde başlı başına bir umut sebebidir.
Ukraine says its top priority for the talks is to negotiate a ceasefire. It insists it will not compromise on its people, territory or sovereignty. Before the meeting started, Ukraine's foreign minister warned those in attendance to be careful. This comes amid reports that Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich and Ukrainian negotiators suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning after a meeting in Kyiv earlier this month.
Я всім раджу, коли хтось їде на будь-які переговори, пов'язані на будь-які переговори з Російською Федерацією, нічого не їсти, нічого не пити. І бажано мінімально торкатися будь-яких поверхень. Це по-перше. По-друге, всі ці історії, там хтось щось де почув, якісь джерела. Зараз дуже багато всього цього, тому що всі спраглі до новин, до сенсацій.
Mr. Abramovich, who is also the owner of Chelsea Football Club, was spotted attending today's talks in Istanbul. On the battlefield, Ukraine says it has managed to push back invading Russian forces in the Kyiv suburb of Irpin. The city has seen some of the heaviest fighting near the capital.
Окупантів відштовхують від Ірпеня, відштовхують від Києва. Проте все ж зарано говорити про безпеку в цій частині нашої області. Бойові дії тривають. Російські війська утримують під своїм контролем північ Київщини, мають ресурси і живу силу. Намагаються відновлювати розбиті підрозділи. Рівень їхніх втрат навіть у 90% не є для них аргументом, щоб зупинятись.
In the port city of Mariupol, another site of fierce conflict, officials say nearly 5,000 people, including more than 200 children, have been killed since the start of the invasion. But there are signs of hope. Ukrainian authorities have announced 3 humanitarian corridors will be opened, including for private cars fleeing Mariupol. The city's mayor says about 160,000 people remain trapped in the port city.
More Ollie Barrett joins us from Riga, Latvia. Ollie, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says these talks must yield, and I quote him, concrete results. But hopes of breakthrough as they headed into these talks were low.
I think that's fair to say from the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, but also from the American perspective as well, and American allies too. There was no expectation of a huge, major breakthrough at these discussions, but perhaps some early signs of movement coming out of the first round of discussions. We've heard from one of Russia's chief negotiators, Mr. Medinsky, saying that he believes the talks have been constructive. He says that Russia has received proposals from Ukraine, which he describes as a clearly formulated position. And he says that those proposals will now be put to Vladimir Putin. We've also heard from the Russian Defense Ministry that it will stop military activity, it says, around Kiev and Chernihiv to create the conditions for further dialogue. Now, a cynic would say that actually it's the Ukrainian counterattacking that's been stopping Russian military activity on the outskirts of Kyiv, if anything. But certainly signs there that there might be some movement in these discussions already. But as I say, hopes limited on any kind of major breakthrough, and that applies to the negotiating teams that are there, but also, as I say, the American allies watching on as well.
Ollie, are these talks overshadowed by reports of poisonings at previous negotiations? How significant is that, given that the Kremlin has since dismissed those reports as fake?
Yes, the Kremlin being very dismissive indeed of those reports. We've been hearing from Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesman. He says it's part of the information campaign. He calls it information sabotage. Part of the information war is how he describes it. He says these reports of poisoning are certainly not true. Dmitry Peskov has confirmed that Roman Abramovich has been playing a role in some of the discussions up to now, and we have seen him at those negotiations in Istanbul. And the Kremlin today telling us that Roman Abramovich's role has been approved by both sides, by the Ukrainians and the Russians, playing a sort of mediating role in the discussions that have been taking place so far. But today he wasn't sitting at the top delegation tables, but as I say, he was certainly there and appears to be in good health.
Thanks for that. Ollie Barrett in Riga.
Well, let's head over to Lviv now, where Kieran McKillen is standing by, ready to join us live. Hey, while both sides have been engaged, in peace talks, Russia seems to be intensifying its attacks.
That's right. Russia really has stepped up its attacks as those negotiators get around the table in Istanbul. The biggest headline of this is the city of Kyiv in the south. It's arguably the biggest shipbuilding center in the Black Sea. The president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, said in the Danish parliament that 7 people had been killed in an attack on the regional government headquarters in that city, another 22 injured. The regional governor himself, his name is Vitaly Kim. He said that he had a lucky escape because he overslept. He didn't come to work in time. And what he's accusing the Russians of doing here is attacking the building as people are arriving at work to cause maximum damage and carnage at that particular location. So that's a worrying escalation, especially if you think of those negotiators in Istanbul trying to come up with some sort of peace settlement. Also, Russian ground forces continue to be entrenched around those major cities in Ukraine, such as the capital Kyiv, Chernihiv, and the city of Izium in the south. Now, what's happening here is that we heard that there was this pivot to Donbass on Friday from the Russian Defense Ministry, and that Russian forces would be discontinuing their ground offensive and concentrating on that eastern flank, especially around the city of Izium, where there is a new front line now developing, and that's something to watch in the next couple of days as the Ukrainian forces battle Russian forces around there. But remember, Russian forces can still shell at will, and they are doing that very effectively, as we saw in Kyiv this morning. And of course, they can continue to hit this entire country from the air.
Well, I certainly hope that the shelling does not continue as the humanitarian corridors are expected to open. How are the evacuations progressing?
Well, yesterday there was no humanitarian corridors at all, which is highly unusual because for the previous couple of days, and indeed all through last week, at least 4 to 7 of corridors were operating. Yesterday there were none. Now, the office of the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, her name is Irina Verchuk, she's responsible for this. She says that today there are 3 corridors operating, 2 in the Donetsk region to the east of Ukraine, and 1 corridor to Mariupol. Now, that's going to take a long time to organize. 75 buses are leaving today from the city of Zaporizhzhia down to Berdansk, which is where this large ship was attacked last week. There's a group of Mariupol residents that have gathered there, and they will then be transported back up to Zaporizhia, and then they'll be able to get on trains and come here to the city of Lviv. Already 200,000 internally displaced people are here. But these human corridors are of great importance as well to these talks, because if the Russians do shell them, and for that reason, actually, they were suspended yesterday because of intelligence from Ukrainian officials that they would be attacked. If they are attacked, it does create ill will in these negotiations that are continuing in Istanbul.
Good speaking with you. Thanks for those updates. Kieran McKillen there in Lviv.